Hey everyone, welcome to this week's replay office hours. We are back. It's been 2 weeks since we've had a stream. I've been busy, but uh, but yeah, it's really exciting to be to be back and doing our office hours again to talk about all things replay. Um, Depending on where you're joining us, it could be Twitch, YouTube, or Twitter. You can catch us on all three, the stream, Replay.io on Twitch and Twitter, or replay.io/YouTube. YouTube is the best way to catch the replays, no pun intended, of previous office hours streams. So make sure that you check those out if you missed any or you want to go back and check out what we talk about. So I'm Cecilia. I am the community lead here at Replay, and I'm joined by Mark Erickson, this side.
Hi, greetings.
Hey, Mark. Thanks so much for hopping on today. Yeah, Mark has joined us for a couple of streams now and always brings a lot of really great insights. So super excited that he was able to join today. And also want to say thank you, Mark, for being an amazing question answerer during the GitHub stream. So yeah, so we just wrapped up. We were on the GitHub Open Source Friday stream just before this. So double duty stream today. And yeah, Mark hopped into the chat and was answering questions left and right. So
Why not?
why not? Yeah. And so Mark's always really great about answering questions. I see you on Twitter. I see you in our Discord all the time. So you can actually catch that stream, the replay of it on twitch.tv/GitHub. It'll be uploaded to their YouTube, but in the meantime, you can catch it on Twitch. So after this one, if you missed it, go back, watch that one, get all your replay needs. We talked about debugging. We took a look at replayable.dev, which is an open source project for finding GitHub issues that have replays attached to them. And we also did some, live debugging with replay. So it was a lot of fun. Yeah. Mark, how are you doing today?
Doing pretty well. I was just saying a couple minutes ago, I managed to go out and sneak in an early round of golf here on a Friday morning, and I actually played fairly decently, which is always nice. But it's also been a pretty productive week personally, which is good. The last couple of weeks, I was running into more problems, shall we say? But also the team's doing a bunch of really cool stuff that I'm excited about.
Yeah, it seems like everyone's been just like really productive, just kind of like you said, tackling some of those like hard problems too, which is really exciting to see. I feel like I can barely keep up with all the threads in Discord, but there's a lot of really great conversations happening. So for those of you who don't know, we do have a public Discord that we work in, replay.io/Discord. You can chat with the team, you can see what we're working on, give your feedback, and just kind of peer behind the curtain, so to speak. The very, it's public curtain, but of what goes into those decisions. Yeah.
I had threads going yesterday and today as I was working on trying to update some of our monorepo tooling. Woohoo!
Oh, interesting. So I actually don't know this. What do we use for?
Okay, so right now we use npm version 8. Our repository is it's a lightweight monorepo. So the primary piece in our code base is the replay next.js application, which lives at the top level. We've added a few different sub packages over time. There's a couple little packages that have like some reusable icons and a couple reusable components. But we've also recently been trying out a couple new architecture prototypes, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. And so we put those in the same repo. And there's some different dependencies between each of those. So we really are approaching like kind of that true monorepo setup where we've got a bunch of different things all living in the same repository. And we've been using npm version 8 because it's the default that comes with Node. But npm version 8 is really, really picky about things like peer dependencies. And we actually use an experimental build of React. It's React 18 plus some of the not yet final features that are in the code base, but not normally published as part of the standard React build. And so things like that cause NPM to get kind of unhappy because, for example, React Redux says that it works with React 16 or React 17 or React 18. And technically what we have is like React 0000 experimental blah 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 blah, which is not actually 18. So we've been seeing some problems dealing with CI things, and so I figured it was worth trying out either Yarn or PNPM as alternate package managers, and see if it works better, see if it complains less.
Nice. Yeah, it's always kind of I know we were just talking about this on the GitHub stream, but like developer tooling is such an important part of the software development experience and can kind of like make or break it a lot of times. Like the first software job that I had did not have great tooling, and it was it was not a great experience. And so I think that kind of work can be really like exponential. It's like in improving everything else that gets done in the code base. So that's awesome. Well, have we ever so we don't use like any, the only kind of mono repo like tool things that I've heard of, I guess, are like NX or and like I guess Lerna maybe, but
yep. Yeah, and NX, Lerna, and Turbo Repo are all other mono repo related tools. I have not had a reason to use any of those yet. My understanding is that, and let's see, there's also overlap with both NPM, Yarn, and PNPM, the package managers, having workspace support, which is kind of like you can have many different sub projects in one repo, but like if they all ask for React, why should we install like 20 different copies of React? We just need one installed, ideally. So I think I know NX has the ability to help manage like creating multiple like library projects and app projects in one repo. I think they can both do some things around managing versioning. Like maybe you've got a bunch of like individual component libraries or something, and they all need to get published at the same time. Turbo Repo, I think, is a little more focused on building a bunch of dependent packages very quickly. I think NX does some of that too, but again, like I haven't actually tried using any of these tools.
Yeah, I know NX from, kind of like from Cypress times, because you could essentially see what packages changed and then only run tests based on like what had changed. And so that's kind of was my first exposure to it. And I know it's like in the Angular community, it's like really popular. So I was kind of, yeah, it's interesting to see again, like kind of all these different organization tools to manage some of those issues to just make things more efficient. So yeah, so I know speaking of like you sounds like you've been really busy working on all these like hard technical problems. You've also been busy doing like talks as well, right? I saw a lot of the videos getting released recently on YouTube with your face on them, and a Redux stream as well too, right?
Okay, let's see. Within the last couple months, I did 2 pre-recorded talks. I did one for Reactathon on the evolution of Redux async logic. I did another for TypeScript Congress, which was a purely virtual conference on lessons learned maintaining TypeScript libraries. We all went to Reactathon, and I was asked to be one of the backup speakers in case anyone else had to drop out, and someone did. So I ended up doing that same Redux async logic talk live, which was fun. That was a really cool outdoor stage. Let's see. I was on one of Tracy Lee's
React meetup, right?
I was in one React meetup like a month and a half ago. I'm scheduled to be on another one in July, and then I think what we're about to talk about in a minute. Kevin Gadiani and I have done a couple different sets of Redux videos where it was like we talk for 3 hours and both just totally nerd out over Redux stuff. And then he takes the time to get it edited and broken into slightly more coherent videos afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, come on, Mark, you nerding out and talking about stuff for hours? What?
Shocking.
So and then it sounds like you've done that with Redux before, and then recently you done it again with Replay and talking
Mhm.
about Replay, the source code, and then also the Replay protocol. How did that kind of come about, or how was that experience?
So, funny thing is, Kevin first heard about Replay, I think, all the way back in like 2019, possibly before it was even like a full company. And apparently, he and Jason had actually talked about the idea of using a library. So, we use Redux and React Redux in our code base. And Kevin is kind of a fan of the RxJS library and the Redux observable library.
Yeah.
And I guess at some point they'd actually talked about like, could you use Redux Observable to manage some of the data flow in the Replay application code itself? And actually, the conclusion was maybe not. So Kevin like knew about Replay, 2 or 3 years ago, but a lot has changed since then. And he and I happened to be chatting within the last couple months, and we both get really excited about like diving into source code and like looking at really complex topics and how they work. And so we just kind of like said, hey, we should just do another one of these about Replay. And so we did another recording, and it was like we started at like 9:30 on a Tuesday night my time and went for like 3 straight hours.
I have no doubt. I have no doubt. That sounds awesome. Yeah, and then I guess the last one's still coming out. Looks like on June 20th.
Yep.
So you can go to youtube.com/c/Kevin Gudani and get notified when that comes out, and then also watch the videos that have already come out. The second one I know was really interesting because you're talking about kind of the code coverage with the Replay API, specifically kind of using that API, the protocol API. Is that right?
Mm. Yep. Yep. So let me see if I can briefly summarize what all is involved there. So Replay consists of 3 different pieces. There's our special forks of the Firefox and Chrome browsers, which allow you to make the recordings in the first place. There's the Replay debugging client, which is the website you go to actually view and debug the recordings. But then the client talks to our backend, and it talks to the backend via a publicly documented API. Now, the backend is secret sauce and proprietary, but the API is public, and literally anybody could sit down and start writing code that talks to our backend, programmatically opens up a recording, and then tells the recording backend, like, hey, give me some information on the source files. Tell me when this line of code got hit. Pause here and give me some information about like the stack frames or something. So we have a repository with a couple small examples, and one of them I wrote, and it actually uses the Replay API to query the backend for the source code of a file. And in this case, I know which recording it's talking to. And then I mashed that up with the ability to fetch the number of hits for every line of code and a standard JavaScript library called Istanbul, which is used to print out code coverage from test runners like Jest. And I was able to ask for the source code, ask for the line hits, feed it through Istanbul, and print out like an HTML formatted coverage report that shows you the source code and the little hit counters in the sidebar. And I did it in like 3 hours. It was cool.
That is awesome. Yeah, I remember we kind of talked about that a little bit on stream before. And so that it's like such a, like an interesting concept because I actually didn't realize that at first that you could like interact with it that way via that protocol. And it sounds like you're working on, I saw this tweet,
Mm-hmm.
something kind of new around that as well, based on that discussion. So could you tell us about what this is?
Yes. So I'm gonna shift this over here. So if it looks like I'm looking sideways, it's because I'm looking sideways. Um, Within the last couple months, we've actually been not terribly happy with the way a lot of our client code is architected. The Replay code base is about 70% code that was copy pasted from the Firefox dev tools from Mozilla a couple years ago, 20% code that we've added since then, and like 10% code that was already there that we proceeded to modify and hack up in different ways. And
sounds like a classic open source code base.
yeah, yeah. And so there is a lot of complexity in the code, and part of it is because we're doing very complicated things, but some of it is also just the fact that we're dealing with code that in a lot of cases started 7, 8 years ago, and it's been modified, and some things are no longer relevant, and we've added other stuff for replay, but some of that's just kind of been layered on top. So like our code base works, but we've agreed that there's a lot of pain points and technical debt in trying to work on our own code. So we've been tossing around some ideas for a hypothetical new architecture. And what does that mean? We're still kind of trying to figure that out ourselves, but we've agreed that some of we'd like to try to reimagine how our code is structured and how we're doing some things to try to make our own code base easier to work on. So Brian Vaughn has taken the time to write down some of the problems we've been dealing with, and he put together a couple of neat diagrams of some of the ideas. Can I actually bring up my screen here?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I was gonna pull it up. There's a request for comment or an issue.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we've got a discussion thread over here that Brian started recently, and one of the big things he pointed to is that our state and our application is really split across. We got Apollo and Redux and React and like our low-level protocol, and we've got all kinds of different data that we're dealing with. So he actually like went in and just tried to create a diagram that categorizes what are the different kinds of state that we have as a way of helping us to start to think about like if we were to start moving these pieces around, where could some of this data live, and could it live in different places than it is right now? And like what are some of the problems we'd like to solve? Like we like our code base to work better with React suspense and testing, and like where some of this data lives. Being able to apply ideas like, our notion of a focus mode where you narrow down and only ask the back end for like, give me the hits in a smaller time range. Right now that the code for that's kind of like scattered all over the place. And it might be nice if we could like centralize some of those ideas. I've listed a few different pain points with some of the things in the code base. We've got some of the code for breakpoints is like thunks layered on top of thunks. We've got several kind of like lowest level sections of interacting with the backend, except I don't actually know what each of those files is responsible for. Fun stuff like that. So Brian went off and wrote a prototype application, just a little standalone Next project, where he tried to take and rebuild the console section of our UI. So fetching the messages that were printed out from breakpoints and whatnot. And he did that using some of the new, technically not even final, React suspense capabilities.
Right, okay.
And it looks really slick.
Nice.
In fact, if you give me a second here, I might even be able to bring that up.
Ooh.
Let's see. Which let me go to Brian's, and let's see if this works. Fingers crossed.
We're doing it live.
Compiling.
Okay, I see a reporting ID.
Okay, here. So this looks like the console section of our application because it's supposed to be a little standalone version. Yeah. So you can see, printing the warnings. We've got some toggle switches. He's also been playing around with like what would it look like if we, like right now we're using Apollo for GraphQL, and he was like, what if we just used like a basic fetch wrapper instead? So Brian has been playing with some of these ideas to see if we can maybe simplify some of those pieces. And I went in and I decided to try prototyping a couple different things. In fact, Jason, our CEO, kind of gave me a bit of a challenge. So we've got this abstraction in our code base called a value front which is this weird, complicated class that is supposed to represent like the value of a variable paused at a specific point in time on the back end. And so the client side receives some data from the back end, but then it creates instances of this value front class to wrap the raw data and provide some methods around it. And it works, but it's really, really weird and hard to deal with. So I went off and I created a prototype that I'll show it real fast and then describe what it's doing. So over here on the left side, I've opened up a recording and I've got a list of the source files, and I'm actually filtering out everything that isn't in a literal source folder in the URL. And if I click on one of these, I select it, and I ask our backend, give me the source text of the code for that file. And then I'm stuffing it in a code mirror editor just so I get all the syntax highlighted. And if I click on one of the lines, in the actual recording, this line of code got hit 4 times. This is a standard Redux counter example, and I clicked the plus button 4 times. So here I've asked the back end, tell me all the times that line 14, column 10 got hit, and we can see that there are 4 different timestamps. So if I click one of the timestamps, it then asks the back end, give me the stack at that point in time, and it gives me a bunch of JavaScript objects that say, like, here's the function name, here's the location details, and then I just loop over it and print all those out. So the idea was a few things. Can I do some of the same requests for things like source file entries and source file code? Can I make like a mini version of the stack frame panel that's in our application? And can I do it with just the lowest level backend protocol package, no other abstractions? And can I drive this using RTK query? So I'll show the code.
Yeah.
Yep, I'll show the code really, really fast. So RTK query is an API that is part of Redux Toolkit that the Redux team, my other hat, released last year. And RTK query works very well with things like a REST API, because you can specify, like, for like a get Pokemon, API, you say, like, here's the base URL that we're going to start talking to, and then you can have like the get Pokemon by name endpoint. You pass in name as a parameter, and it adds /Pokemon/name to the end of the URL. You can also use it with GraphQL, and we have examples of that in the Redux documentation. But you can also use RTK query to fetch literally any arbitrary async function. And the protocol package that we use to talk to our backend API has async functions. So if I specify a query FN field and I make some calls to our API methods here, in this case, I'm just asking the backend, hey, tell me about all the source files that exist in this recording. And then I'm doing some filtering to, like, just give me the ones that start with a /source path. And I bring those back. And then on the UI side, I now have this magically generated use get sources query hook, and I just call that, and a little bit later the data magically shows up, and then I just loop over these and render me some list items. And so I did the same thing with give me the source file contents for a source entry ID, give me the hit points for a given line, and give me the stack frame for a selected point in time. So, like, in one sense, I didn't do anything magical here. I'm just taking a bunch of Lego blocks and stacking them on top of each other. Now, does this mean we're going to use this in our code? Not necessarily. We're still in the figuring out possible ideas phase and trying out some potential things to see if they can solve some of the pain points that we're dealing with. And then we need to talk about, like, what we're actually going to do going forward without, like, breaking everything.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, so that's interesting. So just to make sure that I, like, kind of grabbed that. So RTK query, typically you would use it for like REST APIs. You can also use it with GraphQL. But really, it's just a matter of it's a way to essentially like query any kind of async data and be able to bring that into the UI. So in our case, you can use it to hit our backend or to call those backend functions that are async in order to capture that information. And RTK query is kind of the wrapper around that, or the that you're using. Okay, cool.
Yeah, so
That's really neat.
so you just say, here is my endpoint, either for querying and fetching data, or for doing a mutation that sends an update to tell the server to change. And it auto generates the hooks. It auto generates a reducer that manages all the cache state for you. And then when you use one of the hooks, it automatically starts the request. It will manage the pending done loading state. It'll re-render the component as the loading state changes or as the data comes back. And if all the components that we're asking for the data stop, it'll start a timer. And if no one else wants the data by the time the timer expires, it'll remove that from the cache. So it gives you a lot of capabilities about like cache lifetimes and managing all that stuff. Yeah. So you just say, here's how I get the data. And then like a component says, I want the data, please do the work for me. And it magically shows up. Yeah. So it was pretty cool that I could mash together RTK query as a wrapper plus our API and get data from our back end. It was cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's also neat to kind of just see those pieces and like how, how everything is coming back from the API too. So that's been probably maybe one of my favorite things, is learning more and more about that protocol API, because it was something that just seemed like magic. Like, I mean, it's still pretty magical, but at first it was just like, I don't know, wizardry, who knows? But it's been fun to see how that actually comes together. So.
And like one other example, so we have what we call the object inspector. So like if you log a value, not just a string, but like an object or an array or a primitive, we show a formatted version of that, an interactive version of it in the console. So like if you log an object, you can expand the object, expand its fields, all that kind of stuff. That is a whole bunch of data and a very, very complicated set of React components. Too complicated. Like, remember how I said we have that weird value front class? Yeah, it uses a lot of those. And over the last day or two, Brian has actually been playing around with like, what if we basically rebuilt the object inspector from scratch? And if you look in our Discord, he has a couple threads going where he's showing off some of the preview images. And I haven't looked at the code. Well, actually, I looked at the code for like 5 seconds, but it looks good so far, and it's got to be simpler than what we've got right now.
Nice. Yeah, this is it's really exciting to see all those discussions, and yeah, it's awesome. Thanks so much for digging into that and sharing those examples. I know I didn't like prep you on that at all. You just kind of pulled it up, so I appreciate it.
Like I need incentive to talk about anything.
Well, y'all have been really busy working on all these things. I've been on the road basically at a couple of different conferences and doing events, and so that's why we haven't had a stream for 2 weeks, is because I was at Render ATL and then ViewConf, which I kind of talked about previously. But wanted to share just a couple of quick updates from those before we dig back into some more updates from Replay. So this is a tweet from Kate Travers, who attended the workshop at Render ATL. So Render ATL was here in Atlanta. I'm in Atlanta. It was a really great conference around, it started off as a React conference, but really it was kind of a general, a lot about development. There was a Web3 track, there was a culture track, and Replay did a workshop about debugging React applications. So that was it was a lot of fun. It was a 2-hour workshop. We dug into some bugs, and the slides for that workshop are public. So slides.com/my name, debugging React apps workshop. So if you want to kind of see those and work through the workshop yourself, there's a lot of activities in there to kind of practice and take a look at some common React bugs. So that's something that you'll see we kind of have a pattern here. The more that you debug, the more you can identify patterns, and that makes you better at debugging and spotting those things that cause a lot of issues when you're dealing with framework debugging. So
if
yeah,
I could interject
absolutely.
for a second, like, oh, I've spent years hanging out in the Reactiflex Discord, and we see so many of the same problems popping up over and over that half the time someone says, I see like error message X, or I see this going on. And either someone replies with, oh yeah, that's X, fix it this way. Or we actually have like some some triggered bot messages. We just, like exclamation SU, state updates are asynchronous. You cannot log the new value right up. Like there's a lot of very common things that pop up.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually remember we were talking about like, hey, what are some common bugs that you see? And you were like, accidental mutation. And I was like hands down, that was a big one. Yeah, so for my talk at ViewComp, one of the things that I did was I put, error X is not a function on the screen. And I was like, okay, who's seen this and why did it happen? And everyone's like, oh yeah, this, like a bunch of different reasons. And it's because once you see the same errors over and over again, you start to be like, oh yeah, I know what I did. Just today, I had to debug an issue because my environment variable wasn't pulling through, and it's because I had dropped the first letter, and it was just a typo. It's like I do like to say that you always learn from debugging, but every once in a while it's just a typo, and those just maybe just teach you how to be humble more than anything. But yeah, so at ViewComp, like I said, I talked about debugging Vue applications. So I did Angular, React, and then Vue 3 weeks in a row, and it was a lot of fun digging into it. VueConf was great. Vue was a pretty like tight knit community. So render was like 1,400 people. VueConf was probably like around 350 maybe. So and yeah, it was. So this was a talk that I gave, and I wanted to share this tweet too, because I'm really proud of this slide. I made this debugging dartboard, which is basically like how people approach debugging, and you kind of just pick something and hope for the best. And so console log is obviously in the middle because everybody uses console logs and print statements. But yeah, I appreciated that head desk resonated with other people too. And so Beth actually gave a talk also at ViewConf about unit testing Vue apps, which is really interesting. So check her out as well. And I know all of the talks are going to be on, recorded. They were all recorded, so they'll probably be on YouTube eventually. I'm just not sure when. But again, you can check out the slides from the talk from the Vue Comp as well at slides.com/my name debugging Vue. One more tweet I want to share, just because it's been a couple weeks and we had a lot of tweets and I didn't get to share them before, is so basically what I just said is that everybody uses print statements. So I think the vast majority of developers still use debug using print statements. And that is the exact same thing that we see and that we hear, which is why Replay it leans so heavily into adding console logs retroactively. So thanks so much to everyone who talks about Replay on Twitter. You can always add us if you have any questions or if you have any feedback. We'd love to share. And yes, Mark.
And for those who don't speak startup, PMF is product market fit. In other words, are you building a thing that people actually want to use?
Yes, thank you. I'm so used to the acronyms now. It's like hard to remember to translate them. But yeah, so essentially meaning, yes, people need this, people will use it. And turns out people definitely use console logs. So all right, so let's get into some Replay updates. We do have a new feature that we can show you today. It's an experimental feature. I'm excited about it.
I'm very excited about it.
Yes, this is something that started back with like the code heat maps discussion. Which, yeah, Mark, do you want to tee this up a little bit maybe while I load up the replay?
Okay, sure. So let's back up a little bit. So as your program runs, lines of code get executed. And we were talking about the protocol a minute ago. Like we have the ability to ask our backend, like, give me execute code magically in the cloud and tell me something useful about the replay and the values in memory in the browser. And so we had an old way to ask the back end, how many times did each line of code run. And once upon a time, by which I mean like 2 to 3 months ago, right about the time that I was joining, you had to individually hover over every line of code, and you had the little tooltip, and it would say loading, and it was having to ask the backend on the fly, how many times did this line of code got hit? Well, one of our developers, Josh Morrow, implemented a new set of backend logic that would just like once you open up a file, it will kind of scan through the whole file and find all the numbers of hits right away so that we can feed all that information up to the client. And now, like, as soon as you start hovering, we've already got all the information for every line. So instead of like hover, loading, 27 hits, we've got all the info and we can show it right away. So adding that new backend API was the first really big deal. And that just made the hover tooltip a lot snappier. But like I got really excited about that, and I started tossing out all kinds of ideas for things I would like us to add eventually. And one of the things I noted was, well, okay, like we do kind of show a little bit of this now, where you can see like the line numbers that like couldn't be run or weren't hit or something are shown grayed out. But even then, like I would kind of like to see like right away which lines of code really did get hit and how many times did they get hit without having to hover over every line. So I tossed that out there, and other people thought it was a nice idea. So maybe like 4 weeks ago, I took a few hours and just went in and very briefly tried to hack together a proof of concept for like, can I add like another vertical gutter in the editor next to the line numbers where we can show the information for like how many times did each line of code get hit. And I got something kind of like sort of half working, but the tooltip wasn't working right. I wasn't using all the numbers. So a few days ago, Brian Vaughn picked up my early proof of concept PR and ran with it. And he got the rest of the functionality working, and it's merged in and it's available as an experimental feature right now. And I just like immediately turned that on and I'm leaving it on.
Yeah.
And
So
in
I
fact,
can
even over the last day or so, we've been having a bunch of discussions about like, how can we design this to look nicer and behave better?
So I just turned it on. So you go to settings, experimental, check inline hit count. So yeah, so one of the things that I always notice too is we already have the function count, which is really helpful for me because I can see, okay, like how many times did this run? And so now, I wish I could make my, you can see these kind of faint numbers here. And again, when you hover over, it was showing the 84, the 18. And now we have the line that this gutter that will show you without having to hover. What that number is. You'll still see it when you do hover, but now you can get a sense. But what's helpful for me too is seeing like which ones don't have, lines, or if it's like 3 digits versus 1 digit. That kind of gives me a sense of like if I'm familiar with my code base. This is just like kind of a demo app here, and seeing like, okay, this one ran 108 times, like that's happening a lot versus some other things that aren't rendering quite as frequently. You mentioned talking about some of the design aspects of it. And so, again, in our Discord, we have been having a lot of conversations around this. You can see we have a front end channel where we're talking about, there's a big long thread about these, but people are throwing out some ideas, right? And so, how can we design this to kind of give an indication of what those numbers mean, or like kind of be able to see it at its face value. So this is just like an example of that we were kind of looking at different options, doing gradients, doing colors, doing numbers, doing pills, doing lines, doing hard stops, soft stops, fades.
Do we color the hit numbers? Do we color the backgrounds? Do they have pills? Do they have no pills? Our wonderful primary designer, John Bell, was cranking out a whole bunch of ideas. Travis Arnold came up with, I think, some of these suggestions here. It's been very interesting back and forth.
Yeah. So design is not really like my strong suit, I would say, but I think it's super interesting to like see all the different examples. And then as a user, because like I use replay all the time, be like, okay, yeah, what would be helpful, or what would I like to see, or what does this mean to me? And so, yeah, so I'm really excited about this feature. You do have to enable it. It is experimental, but I think really what we're getting at is what can we tell you about your code? What can we tell you about what ran during that execution, during that recording? And so, yeah, so it's been exciting to see that kind of come to fruition. So again, experimental settings, line hit counts, you can turn it on right away, and you can start giving us feedback in our Discord. So, all right, so we have a little bit of time left. There's one more thing that I kind of wanted to get into. Mark, do you want to look at a Cypress test?
Sure, why not?
So, we've been working on this. This is like experimental alpha, like it's not even documented, kind of like you'd have to like try and go find it. But we were able to get a Cypress test recorded with replay. I thought it was really cool, and so I kind of want to like show it off and give a preview.
I haven't seen this happen yet, so
okay, cool. Yeah, so on the team, Brian Hackett and then Ryan Duffy have been working on getting the Cypress recorder up and running. So I used to be at Cypress for 2 years. Cypress is like different than other browser drivers. It's not a browser driver, it's an actual application. So there's some kind of additional things that go into that. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and bring this on to the stream. And so what essentially we do is we just replace the browser that you are running your tests in with the replay version of that browser. So let me drag this back over here. Okay, so this is a replay of a Cypress test. So this is a test that we have for kind of like a backend admin site that we use. And this is the viewer of it. And essentially what you do is when I recorded it locally, I ran npx cypress run -- replay browser is the replay Firefox, pass in some environment variables, my API key, all that fun stuff. Again, the configuration isn't quite set up yet, but we're able to capture the test execution, including the test code, and then also your application source code to be able to debug. And this is a test that failed. I failed, so it automatically uploaded the recording to my library. I'm sorry, no, I had to manually upload it to my library. It automatically uploads if you're using Playwright. Cypress, right now, you manually upload it unless you're using the GitHub action. But this is the test. And so it does show the Cypress command log on the left-hand side. There is an option to enable or disable that. So if you just want to see your application, you can do that too. I personally find it helpful to see the command log. So this is actually, and I want to just say too, this is like the new Pretty Cypress 10, which just released 2 weeks ago. So the UI if it looks different for you, it's because you probably need to update. But the Cypress team worked really hard on getting Cypress 10 out. It has component testing in it as well. And it has a really nice kind of new interface. So on the left-hand side, we see the test kind of running, have it before each hook. It's trying to visit, kind of looking kind of sluggish. I'm running against my local host. And then, some things happened and the test fails. So, yeah, it happens, right? We've all been there. And so I started to kind of dig into this and go to like certain spots. And I caught this here. And again, Cypress is pretty fast. It's like, it's an automated test, but we're able to catch it. And I was able to catch and see that there is kind of this uncaught exception type error. Pages is undefined. Interesting. And so I dug into the dev tools and I can see my test code and I knew what test it was that failed. And so I kind of came into my sources and I pulled that up here. Again, the test code, even like my support file with my custom commands gets captured, which is nice. So if I have custom commands that are like being leveraged in my test code, I can see those. And this is the test. Essentially, I have a pages array that has all the URLs. And then for each page, I'm creating a Cypress test. I have a for each, and I'm just looping over it. And I'm saying, navigate to this page, validate that the URL is this, or click on it, and then validate that the title is that. And so in my mind, like whenever I have a failed test, I'm like, is this a real failure, or like do I not care about this? Like, was it the test code? Was it the application? Was it the environment? Like, do I just need to like rerun it? And so right away, I can see like from the video that, okay, like pages is not defined. I can come into my test code and I can see like, well, pages is something that's in my test code. And it looks like there was some kind of like in the actual execution of the Cypress code itself. So that the test code, like my application was loading fine. I can actually come in here. It was a little slow. It was sluggish, right? But the only errors that I have is the type error. I don't have any like things that was thrown from my source application. So my application did an error, didn't bug out. My network requests seem to be going fine until it froze. So I like made a fetch request to a backend. It was status code was undefined because at that point, these things kind of like froze up and it just kind of died from there. So that tells me that it's something to do with the actual, I believe this actually may be like something with the build process, like while it's running the test, because I was running it locally, that maybe, or it's something to do with how I wrote this test. This was a flaky test. It passed the other times and it failed this time. So we can kind of like, which, those happen, right? And we can kind of dig into it here and see. So I can kind of come in here and I can see, okay, this hit 4 times, which makes sense. So it generated that if block 4 times. And then this only executed 1 time because this is like the one test. And so I can log here and I can see I can see if page like exists, right? And I can see, okay, my user sessions, my teams, my users and my subscriptions, I have my URLs. And then if I want to see like, basically the error that I was getting is that pages is undefined. If I try to log pages, I'm getting like a variable pages has been optimized out. So I don't know if that's something where during the build process, like they stripped it and we was like, no, wait, we still need that for the Cypress code. I can kind of dig in a little bit more under the hood and see what's going on. But the more like kind of like the really kind of the big takeaway here is that Cypress failed due to a type error. I don't see anything being thrown by my source application. I'd see the network requests were coming back fine. The application I could see was loading on the screen. And so this is a test that I probably don't need to worry about that it's like caused a bug in my application code. Like I said, I reran it, like, I reran it, it passed. I would then want to go in and debug more about like why this happened. Maybe it's my environment, maybe it's the build process, whatever it may be. But that is kind of what the insights that recording the test with replay can give you versus having just the log and having just the screenshots and being able to actually see the value of different of those variables at different points in time. So
I wonder what would happen if you moved pages outside the scope of the describe.
So yeah, and like imported it, you mean?
Or no, just like the top level of the module file.
Yeah. So I was thinking about that. Like it may be better off as like a fixture, and I can just like use like Cypress fixtures or something like that. Because it's not anything. It's not anything like where I'm like async getting data. It just like exists, right? And so the thing is, I use the same format for like other tests too, where I'm looping through like filters and things like that, and it doesn't. This is the only time that it's failed. So I'm curious, like, yeah,
I mean, it looks valid.
Yeah, so it is like it's one of those things where it's like this is a flaky test and it's flaking for like a weird reason, and it doesn't have to do with the application. It has to do with the way that the test code is written or the way that the test is running, or potentially like the whatever is happening under the hood with that execution. So those are the kind of questions that are like we want to be able to answer, and then from there say, okay, now what really happened. And I didn't dig into this too much because I just haven't had a chance to yet. But there's a lot of other code in here too that we could probably dig into, right? So you have like the runner, for example. Like this is going to be some messy stuff. But if you wanted to get in there, yeah. So if you wanted to go in and see kind of maybe like what was happening under the hood a little bit more, you could. There's so like it's interesting, yeah. But all that gets captured because all that's happening in the browser. The only thing that we wouldn't obviously capture is the things that are happening outside the browser. Like if I had a crash on my server, like running in my local environment or whatever it would be. So yeah, right now, it's like I said, I'm recording this locally. It can be recorded also in CI. You just have to configure it, and we are working on the documentation building out for that. But yeah, hopefully that's, I don't know. I wanted to show it off because I think it's really cool. Um, awesome. So let us, if you come into the replay Discord and you ask us, like give us some feedback. If you have a project that you think maybe like you want to just check it out and you want to try it and give us feedback too, like I'd be open to like, shit, we can like hop on a call where we can talk through it together and stuff too. So yeah, and then again, kudos to the Cypress team for this very pretty Cypress 10. It's my first time using it, and I wrote a bunch of tests with it, and it was super fun. So it like creates your spec files for you. It does like the automatic config. So yeah. All right. Well, that's what I have for you for the stream today. Mark, thank you so much for joining. As it's always a joy. I always learn something new. So, and yeah, awesome. Again, everyone, you can catch us in the Discord, replay.io/Discord. And you can also catch replays at replay.io/YouTube. So if you want to see replay of the replay, check it out there. So,
we're all about the time travel here.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. I think I made a joke the other day about project management, and I used time travel as an example. And so, yeah, I just we get into it. So, awesome. Well, thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next week. Cheers.